This is just the outline of my presentation, and pardon me, good afternoon to you, Prof, and the colleagues. It's just that we've been stressed by trying to log in. I forgot to greet everybody and the students and whoever that may be joining us this afternoon. This is just the outline of the presentation, and then subsequent to that, I have the background. The primary objective of all the chemicals and waste MEAs, which are the multilateral environmental agreements, in other terms, the conventions that South Africa is a party to, is primarily to protect the environment and human health from the adverse effects of these pollutants that find themselves in the environment due to human activity. We have the United Nations Environmental Program that is mandated with ensuring that we have a safe environment and thus protecting human health, and it is responsible for these chemicals and waste conventions, or MEAs. As the department, the FFE, we are the focal point and a designated national authority because we have to engage with other countries internationally. Chemicals are needed for various applications, as we know. It could be pesticides to control pests, including human parasites, or they could be utilized to manage disease burdens, or to increase food production, or to purify water, and so forth. But we have come to know that they're highly hazardous, very toxic to the environment and human health, and also they can be abused. Do we have a problem of environmental persistent pharmaceutical products in South Africa? A resounding yes. Prof will speak to that. We do have serious problems, as these EPPs have been found in wastewater facilities. We know everything that we introduce in the environment, whether it's through production or whether it's through waste, ultimately ends up in water. And our wastewater facilities are actually the reservoir of all that we do. If you want to know anything, go there to the wastewater facilities. That's where you'll find these. And also we've got our general landfill sites, as you know, in the country. It's very few metros that have started initiating of separation of a source of waste, that is household waste. So things that ordinarily should not go to general landfill site or in our bins at home end up going there, although they are hazardous and they should be disposed of differently. And because we have introduced these pollutants, and in this particular case, environmental persistent pharmaceuticals to the environment, ultimately we find these in our tap waters, because the systems we have in place to recycle and clean water are such that they are not able to extract these environmental pharmaceutical products that are persistent from the system. So we do drink these in the water that we get from our houses, albeit it being safe or purified. Now, we have obvious challenges that contribute to the problem we have in South Africa, one of which is lack of stringent measures to control prescription of medication, for example, that we get from our pharmacies. You can go to Sunnyside, you can go to Arcadia, downtown Joburg. It's easy to just get even scheduled medication. And there are cases whereby pharmacists, they do know that they ought to give a certain amount, but then they are bribed to give beyond the amount that they are supposed to give, and in the process negating their oath. And also generally from the public, there's naivety and misconception that it's only alcohol and prescription medication that are really a problem, not understanding that these can be addictive. It's only street drug that they think are a problem. And the common ones are painkillers and cough syrups. And then another issue that we'd like to highlight is cross-border illegal trades, because then you have people buying in bulks over the counters, and then they export these illegally to other SADC countries through our ports, be it the airports or land borders. And this taints South African reputation in terms of control measures in place. And we hear about these when we're in these environmental fora under the UN umbrella. Now, I've selected the conventions that South Africa is a party to that have got specific environmentally persistent pharmaceutical products that we can relate to as a country. For example, you have the Stockholm Convention on Persistent Organic Pollutants. Organic pollutants, they're very toxic. They bioaccumulate in fatty tissue organisms. Also, they magnify in traffic levels of the food chain, and they can travel over very long distances, that is between continents. And also, they've been found to be endocrine disruptors. Now, exposure to such can, as you touched on, Prof, we have a significant increase in cancers throughout in Africa. And sadly, we're still using some of these persistent organic pollutants, although most of the countries within the continent are parties to the conventions. We have not moved significantly in terms of replacing them with safe alternatives. We have seen the increase in birth defects, for example, dysfunctional immune system and other systems, intersex. Sadly, our people think that when a child is born that is neither male or female is probably bewitched. But the truth of the matter is we have more exposure to these environmental persistent pharmaceuticals that are in the environment that are also endocrine disruptors. And there's greater susceptibility to disease because the immune system is affected, including diminished intelligence, which is IQ, because some of these, they can affect the central nervous system. A typical example that we have in South Africa is gamma hexachlorocyclohexane, which is common term, is lindane, which is used in shampoos to treat head lice. It's no longer allowed. We said we shouldn't use it as a country, but we have had instances whereby it's illegally been utilized. So I'm making it publicly that we should not be using lindane anymore as a country because there are safe alternatives. And then we have another convention, which is the Montreal Protocol on substances that deplete the ozone layer being up there in the stratosphere. And South Africa being positioned the way it is, we're very close to the Southern Hemisphere, South Africa and Australia and New Zealand. Now, these chemicals, they deplete the ozone layer, and some of these refrigerants that are also utilized in cooling systems, whether it's fridges or air conditioning and foam sector. Of specific relevance to this group is aerosols. Now, this ozone layer that is depleted because of the use of these ozone depleting substances has got bad consequences, among which there's an increase in UVB radiation because then there's no longer that layer that protects us, which then causes skin cancer. South Africa is number 2 after Australia in terms of incidences of skin cancers. Also, it causes crop damage because then there's too much UV radiation, too much heat. And as an arid country and with a low rainfall, we are then most vulnerable. Also, there's a decrease in marine phytoplankton caused by ozone depletion. Those that are particularly having chlorine and bromine atoms, particularly the chlorofluorocarbons. Now, of interest here is that these CFCs are also utilized as propellants in our asthma and the COPD medication. Those inhalants that we use, what we call as pumps, the small ones. Now, what we're saying, we need to move away from these and utilize the ones that don't have CFCs. Now, this is the strategic approach to international chemicals management, in short, Cycam. This is a broad policy framework that promotes chemical safety globally. And it has a decision-making body that is the ICCM International Conference on Chemicals Management. South Africa, we became a signatory to it in 2006 when it held its first meeting of all interested parties. That's when we signed to say we want to be actively involved. For example, the other ones I mentioned before, that is the Montreal Protocol and the Stockholm Convention, they are legally binding. This one, we have industry, not just governments, industry and academics playing a significant role equally. And then what we have here is not legally binding, but then there are activities that are agreed to. The primary objective is that sound management of chemicals throughout their life cycles, they should be such that by 2020, which is the year 2 years before, chemicals are produced and utilized in ways that minimize significant adverse impacts on the environment and human health. I should say we couldn't reach that, achieve that 2020 target, and we're carrying it forward for post-2020, and we're busy with the negotiations. Under these, from time to time, countries bring forth data, we scrutinize it, and we agree that indeed, when we have collated data from various or different regions globally, that there is a problem. And then we would then nominate those for a global concerted action. Among the ones that were nominated in 2012 is lead in paint, chemicals and products, hazardous substance, that is e-waste, nanotechnology and manufactured nanomaterials, endocrine disrupting chemicals. Of interest to this group, environmentally persistent pharmaceutical pollutants, fluorinated chemicals, and highly hazardous pesticides. The objective, in essence, is to move away from these and replace them with safe alternatives. And then I see a question from Prof in terms of collecting data from the region. We're struggling. South Africa is one country, and probably followed by Zambia. Generally, we have a lack of data, and I could attribute that to several things, because there are various universities in the region, and Prof, you would need to come in here in terms of partnerships and collaboration with other universities. There is disconnection between policy development and research that is undertaken. So we need to strengthen the research policy interface such that then governments' national priorities, as some emanating from these international agreements that we're parties to, would influence the research. But also the researchers should be on the lookout for all these environmental persistent pharmaceuticals that are out there in the environment and undertake monitoring from time to time. Of course, resources need to be allocated for such, for researchers to be able to pursue such. But also I should indicate international partnerships are very important. If then your country, probably through to restraints in finances available resources, we can partner with universities abroad, or some governments can fund your initiatives in terms of research that needs to be undertaken, because each and every country of these that I've listed before us, each country needs to undertake an inventory to find out the status quo, and from time to time research to the UN, report rather to the UN, what is the status quo, what are the initiatives undertaken in terms of phasing these out and replacing them with safe alternatives. So we have a paucity of data from the region, and that's why South Africa, from time to time, when there's a heated issue, we take some of our relevant researchers that have come on board to work with us as a department, so that we can share directly with the rest of the continent in terms of studies undertaken. Now, there's UNEP, which is the body of the UN that is mandated for environment, safety, and human health, that is secondary. As we know, WHO is the one primarily mandated with human health. It's based in Nairobi, Kenya, the offices. And from time to time, we request the UN Environment Program to collect data and to produce reports and undertake research studies. And in 2019, we have what we call Global Chemicals Outlook. How are we doing as the international community? And we wanted to know any advancement since 2012 nomination of these products. And regarding EPPs, we acknowledge that since they are biological active substances, definitely they have an impact on wildlife and ecosystems health when they are not treated in an environmental sound manner. And all of this is in the UNEP 2019 document. We're currently pleased with the third Global Chemicals Outlook at the moment, collecting data. And governments then are asked questions from time to time, what are you doing? And then in 2019, about 4,000 active pharmaceutical ingredients were administered worldwide, which are utilized to then manufacture these drugs and veterinary drugs. But what needs to be known is that from a chemicals and waste management perspective, we acknowledge that we need these. But then there are environment and human health concerns in this sector, primarily because then when these are not managed throughout the life cycle and value chain, there's a problem. They get to be introduced in the environment, and people and animals get to be exposed to these. And you get these being released, as I said, in water systems, whether it's rivers or lakes and wastewater facilities, groundwater, and so forth. And they are used across. And they end up getting into the food chain. And as we know, as people who are up the highest level in terms of the food chain. So some of these, they bioaccumulate in the food chain in fatty tissues, and also biomagnify, meaning us on top of the food chain. We end up having extremely higher concentrations of these than the ones that could be lower in the food chain. This is a grammatical representation of literally the whole life cycle and value chain, and how then these end up interacting and causing the problem we find ourselves. I know sometimes pictures are more easy to grasp and to follow quickly than the work. Hence, I picked this up from OECD. We're not a member of OECD, but we are very active as an associate. Now, coming to national coordination, we realized way back 2005, I think 2008 when we started, that chemicals are cross-cutting in nature. We needed to come up with a national mechanism that would be primarily meant to coordinate chemicals management in the country, enhance implementation and compliance with regulatory framework, both international and national ones, avoid duplication, and also maximize the utilization of the resources we have. Also to raise awareness, education, and training, because also we acknowledge the fact that our, should I say, curricula in most academic institutions doesn't necessarily dwell that much or specifically pay a lot of attention in the emerging pollutants we find ourselves faced with in the country. It's generally more focused on managing diseases. So we acknowledge that there's a need to work together. And then we have a national subcommittee on strategic approach to international chemicals management that is specifically focusing on emerging contaminants. And those, we did get into a partnership with UNEP, a 2-year project to strengthen the country's institutional approach and also efforts. But because of limited funding, we could only do the ones listed in front of us, not all of the emerging pollutants that are listed under Cycam. So phasing out lead and paint, we've got regulations in place. We did take stock, we've worked with the industry, and then we need to develop national action plans. We have undertaken an inventory on highly hazardous pesticides and environmentally persistent pharmaceutical pollutants, endocrine disrupting chemicals, and cadmium. We prioritize these because of the nature and the exposure possibilities above the others. We are a small group composed of various national relevant departments. So it's us as environment, it's agriculture, and we have academics that will work with us, and Prof will speak and is part of this Prof. Leslie is part of this subcommittee. So what we did, we took the inventory, and now we're coming up with a national implementation plans in terms of how, as a country, can we then manage this in an environmentally sound manner, and also come up with measures and the legal tools. For example, also come up with measures of enforcing labeling, because some of these things we import, but there are systems we are having in place, and we can collaborate. With the countries in SADC, because what we do affects SADC too. Now, having said all of this, what is important is the academic training institutions, because that's where we have students being taught in terms of their various career, in this case, pharmacists. They go out there, but then what we're saying, Section 24 of the Constitution, which is the right to a safe environment, is a collective responsibility. So let each one of us collectively do their part. But in doing our part, we need to work together to avoid duplication, and Maximize Now should have a relevant specific module that should be developed to ensure that teaching of these environmental pollutants, it becomes a norm in the institution, and so that then the students, before they go out there in the field, they can have exposure and real understanding of real life situations and the negative environmental and human implications of, for example, in this particular case, EPPs and other pollutants when they are not managed in an environmental sound manner throughout the life cycle and the value chain. So what we are saying, and they're pleading with institutions like medical, pharmaceuticals, and science students and practitioners, that they need to get proper training before they go out in the field, because it's difficult to come back for advanced training once you're in the field, so that we can share relevant information and relevant training that could be offered. Some of these is offered internationally, of which then we can liaise with the relevant institution when we know or we're informed that there's this specific training for a particular group of students or practitioners or academics, and then we say there's this, so that everybody can join in, particularly now with online training. As a department, we're very much committed to equipping students and practitioners and to share the knowledge we have and the experience and the expertise that we are having. And I need to indicate it's not just the Section 24 of the Constitution. Our National Development Plan as the country, which is targeting 2030, is also mentioning that we should manage these environmental pollutants. There's the Africa We Want, which is 2063 target, the same thing. And also Sustainable Development Goals, which is 2030 development agenda, because these directly impact on the environment and human health. And when the environment is compromised and the human health is compromised, our activeness in the economy and developing our countries, definitely those would be also compromised and inhibit our development the way it ought to happen. And with these particular things that we can't see, these pollutants, environmental persistent pharmaceutical pollutants, it's a problem, particularly in our African people, in the sense that we can't see these. And even those that are learned, not necessarily everybody knows about this. Then you get people thinking that the children are bewitched, but the truth of the matter, we have these in water, we have these in the food that we eat. So we need to work together. I think that is our last slide, Prof. I'd like to thank you once again for the opportunity that has been afforded to us as a department. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Zuki. Do we have any questions or comments for her? So, I mean, there was a comment around research and also funding for research. So, is that something that is available, or one would have to go through, say, the NRF?
Thank you, Professor. To respond to that one, we work well with Department of Science and Technology and Innovation. Since way back when we started the MCM 2009, because we have come to know from experience when we were students also and working with some of the academics that there's a problem in terms of allocation of funding. We have specifically been requesting them to allocate more funding. Initially, it was for POPs specifically, and then we've broadened those with the emanation of these other environmental pollutants that it should not just be POPs, all environmental pollutants, particularly those ones within Cycam, listed under Cycam, there should be more funding. And the truth of the matter is that there's limited funding in the country. Each and every department has less than what it had before. So there's not much that we can get nationally, but we are still continuing to make that plea with science and innovation, that the money that they allocate to NRF, they should emphasize that researchers within this field should have funding. And also with our conventions, we continue to indicate that we don't have the resources, because you can't come up with a national implementation plan when you don't know the status of the pollutant you're having in the country. So we need to take inventories and monitor if the measures we've put in place to control these are really effective or not. So there needs to be monitoring and from time to time, so that then we can go back to the water and sanitation. They were doing that water research commission. Also, we work with them to say there should be. So what I can advise is that have a look at NRF, have a look at water research commission, because they call out for proposals from time to time on this area, because we tell them it's very important.
All right.
And then internationally too, partnerships.
Okay. Thank you very much. Right. Over to you then, Dr. Sigobogla.